Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to come out for West Carleton March's 2024 draft budget consultation meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone both in the room here this evening as well as those watching on YouTube. For those of you who couldn't make it in person tonight, your time is still appreciated. And of course, it's most appreciated that you've taken the time to come out in the evening in the middle of the week to discuss this. So thank you for taking the time to be here. I'd like to acknowledge the City of Ottawa staff that are here. Councillor Rogers, I'm so sorry. Leslie Bankley. I should have done that before we started. But I do appreciate you making the time to come out here tonight as well. And I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce the staff that are in the room. We got, in no particular order, we have Lisa McGee over here in the corner, Corey Watt, and we got Steve Warren over here. And I've really been looking forward to this year's budget consultation since last year. The reason for that is we have much more time to discuss the draft budget this year. We have time to discuss what we want to see in the draft budget rather than just react to a draft budget. So that's something I've been looking forward to since we stood in here less than a year ago to do this. And I think that having an opportunity, multiple stages throughout the budget process to have input is important. And I think that's something that people expect, and the ability to discuss and critique and adjust throughout the various stages of the budget. Because at the end of the day, it's really about hearing from you and what you want to see in the budget, what you think our priorities should be. And I believe it is essential, really, and the only respectful way to draft a budget that reflects the desires, challenges, and concerns of residents. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm sick. That's why I'm wearing a mask and why my voice doesn't sound like it normally does. And I'm not quite as sharp as I normally am. So I just wanted to let you know that before we start. And I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we're gathered today is the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. So when it comes to resident feedback and community feedback, that process doesn't begin or end with tonight's budget consultation. That process began on November 15th of last year when I was sworn in. The phone on the other side of that wall rings many times a day. We receive many emails and visits from constituents on a regular basis. So again, this is feedback that we've been receiving since the term started. We've also been doing door-to-door campaigns in various neighborhoods just to get feedback. I've had a roundtable discussion in CART with the mayor, with various leaders from the community, business leaders, just regular residents. And we've established a Ward 5 Agricultural Advisory Council, which I have met with once already, and we will be meeting quarterly. And the other thing that we've been doing is meeting with the Community Association presidents once every quarter and hearing regularly from them on how we can do better in supporting the work they do. So based on all of that, we've already put together a rough sketch of the needs and wants for the Ward 5 budget, or for the Ward 5 portion of the 2024 budget. And we can get into those items in a little bit. But before we begin looking at the priorities and hearing from you, I do think it's important to address the current climate in which we're drafting this budget. So the city, even more so than last year, I believe, is under enormous financial pressure and faces several really big challenges. Rising cost of delivering services, while also working within a fragile economy, and many residents facing household financial challenges. This means that we've been asked to keep our costs in check and tax increases at a manageable amount for families, and we're drafting this year's budget with no more than a 2.5% increase as our guide. We've got a large transit deficit, we've got Lansdowne 2.0 to look at, affordable housing crisis, and facing the increased costs of dealing with climate change, and the salaries and benefits that make up a huge portion of the City of Ottawa's budget. We have a large and growing bureaucracy at the City of Ottawa. In terms of what comes out of tonight, I plan to put together a very comprehensive document based on what we've discussed here, what we've heard already throughout the term, and really what we would like to see in this year's budget. So that will be sent to Councillor Rogers, Wendy Stephenson, the City Manager, as well as the Mayor, and it will also be released to the public, so you guys will all be able to see exactly what we asked the City for. The draft budget will be presented to Council on November 8th, and at that point we'll have the opportunity to review it and solicit further feedback from residents of Ward 5. And I will be appearing at key committees as we discuss the draft budget, just and those discussions, particularly transportation, emergency services, and of course agriculture and rural affairs. So the list of issues and priorities that we have, and this is just sort of to guide the conversation this evening, and of course I'm not tied to any of these if they don't mesh with you. I'd love to hear from you the feedback on the list that we've put together, and of course we can add and subtract as we go. But the number one thing on my list is service levels. So getting the basics right, giving people clear responses in a timely manner, and delivering consistently on core services and key priorities. Roads, ditches, and infrastructure. So we've been hearing a lot about ditches, maintenance of ditches, movement of water, wild parsnip, and of course sewer and water infrastructure in the village of Carp and throughout the Carp Road corridor. The roads that we hear most about are Carp Road, Wood-Kilden, Thomas Dole, and March Road. And I believe that you all have access to a handout that shows the exact areas of those roads that we, which I don't know, do they have the handout?
I didn't do the roads handout.
Okay, we'll get that to you so you can see what it is. So it tells you from what intersection to what intersection we've requested or will be requesting. Flooding mitigation and disaster response, so ability to respond to disasters from community centers, internet access, backup generators, cell phone service. These are all challenges that we face in the rural wards when a crisis does hit, and I've already experienced that multiple times since being elected. Emergency services and EMS, so rural response times continue to be, in my opinion, unacceptable. We have a low level of police enforcement and police presence out here. And, you know, we've all heard the news about speeding and street racing throughout the city. And of course, in the rural areas, those challenges are even greater because of the speeds at which people are able to get up to. The chances of death in a collision in a rural ward is far greater than a collision anywhere else in the city. And solid waste management. So I'm actually on a sponsors group, a small group of councillors who are helping to guide the conversation when it comes to the solid waste master plan. There was some discussion earlier in the term about a new plan for solid waste. And so I'm happy to let you know that there are some good work being done in the background by city staff on our solid waste master plan. And they're coming to council with some options for us to explore, which do look really promising. And it's a mix of, you know, reduction, possible incineration that the city's been looking very seriously at, which I was happy to see, and some other things like anaerobic digestion for organic matter. Many of the issues that we've identified here, and I'm sure many of the issues that you're going to bring up tonight, will not be solved through a single budget, and they'll be longer term projects. So that's why I'm really excited about the fact that we are having a rural summit. I can tell you that fall of 2024 is when that is being slated to take place, and planning is underway at the city right now to come up with the plan for the rural summit and exactly what that's going to look like. So that was my very first action as your councillor, was to move a motion to bring back the rural summit. That's something I'm very proud of and will continue to work on throughout the term. And then even what comes out of that rural summit, I think, will be really important. I think there's hope for our future with the rural summit. You know, the summit will likely consist of smaller sessions in rural wards, and then we'll have a culmination of all of that with a larger event at City Hall, and I'm sure that a comprehensive report and recommendations will follow. And I see this actually as our biggest opportunity in decades to discuss how the city approaches rural issues and, you know, gets some of the challenges that we face acknowledged and addressed, and recognize the uniqueness of rural wards in the city of Ottawa. So here I can reference, am I able to reference the handouts?
You look at me?
No, I'm looking at Lisa.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So you do have a handout. One is an opportunity to provide feedback in writing for tonight. Like, I know not everybody is comfortable standing up and speaking in a group or something that comes to you later. We've given you all forms that you can fill in and send back to us with your ideas, concerns, critiques, whatever you want to see. There are sheets showing the breakdown of where your property taxes are allocated with fire, police, solid waste, etc. And there's 3 iterations on that sheet. That's based on a home valued at about $500K, which is probably a little under the average in West Carleton, as well as some transportation options and what we're charged. If anyone wants to see a more specific breakdown of that, see Lisa in the corner and she'll pull it up. And Yeah, so I guess at this point I can hand it over to Cyril for a quick presentation, and then we'll be opening it up to you guys for feedback and thoughts on the 2024 budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, everyone. So tonight, obviously, we haven't released our budget yet. That's 3 weeks away, just under 3 weeks away. So I'm not speaking to any numbers. My team, we're in the final stages of building that budget for Taylor and on the rate. Tonight's presentation is basically a little more of an opportunity to inform a little bit of education in terms of the process, how the budget works, opportunity for you guys to ask some questions. Please stop me at any point in time. Don't wait till you know something you want me to stop on a slide. Put up your hand, address the question there. I'll try and go a little bit quick because I find there's better dialogue with the dialogue back and forth as opposed to me just kind of rambling through some slides. So next slide, please. So basically overall, the objective really is to talk about what a municipal budget means, the basics, the fundamental basics of the budget, talk about the process of development, where we start, where we finish, and what that looks like, and then of course questions at the end, or questions throughout the presentation, just stop at any time to this. Next slide. So again, one of the core things that we always reiterate, we are required to have a balanced budget. Unlike our provincial partners or colleagues and our federal colleagues, they can budget for deficits, we can't. Legislation states that every municipality needs to budget for a balanced budget. What that means is whatever expenditures I put forward that's going to cost me to invest in or spend in the front of a year, I need to make sure that I have equal revenue or dollars coming into the system to kind of pay for that. So I can't have my bank account go into overdraft. It's got to stay balanced as I plan for each successive budget. I'll talk a little bit about the operating versus the capital budget, kind of a little bit of nuance between the two budgets. Speak to the funding sources. Again, as a municipality, we have a very, very small window of opportunities for revenue. Taxation is about 52% of our budget. Unlike our big colleague, big brother, City of Toronto, all municipalities in Ontario are governed by the Municipal Act. In Toronto, so 441 municipalities fall under this Municipal Act. The one other municipality, they have their own specific act, and that's called the Toronto Act. Toronto has the ability to do a lot of things. They have a lot of different mechanisms to generate tax. So even though their taxes are always higher than ours, they have a lot of different levers that they can generate other taxes in their system that we cannot do. So they have definitely an advantage over all the other municipalities in the province. As an example, I'll talk about different levies. So when I saw it say levy, that's property tax. So if you look at the back of your tax bill, usually you'll see property tax from citywide services, which I'll speak to. There's a transit tax levy, there's a police tax levy, and there's our rate program, which is our water usage and utilities. Next slide. Again, as I mentioned, we are required to balance. We need to make sure all our expenditures are covered by a revenue source. I cannot budget for a deficit. I need to make sure I run a balanced budget. Next slide. So this is just basically kind of a little, core examples of the difference between operating and capital. So on the left side or right side, depending on where you're facing, our operating budget. So these are basically our staff salaries. So all staff salaries are considered operating budgets. Our winter operations, these are things, core services that we deliver, fire, paramedics, utilities, fuel, so all the day-to-day electrical bills. So if you look at your current house, your phone bill, your internet, your electric bills, your electricity bills, that would be considered operating. On our capital side, these are investments into our core infrastructure, so our roads, rehabilitation, any new sewer work, any new facilities that we build. If you compare that to your house, if you put a new roof on your house, that will what we would consider a capital budget. That investment goal spans more than 1 year. If we invest into a new road, typically that road is good for 20 years. So that's capital is more than 1 year versus operating is a 1 year expenditure. Next slide. Funding sources for operating, again, the majority does come from our tax bill, about 52-53% comes from taxation and different levies. We do have our user fees, that's mainly on our rate structures, that's our water, wastewater, and stormwater. Other examples of user fees would be your recreational programs, transit fares, etc. Assessment growth, that is another form of taxation, so any new house that comes onto the tax roll in a year. So if I ever go across and build a new house in the next 6 weeks, that's the brand new taxation revenue that I had for January 1st. That's a new dwelling that didn't exist in this year. That's what we consider assessment growth in a very simplified version. Provincial federal funding, again, our paramedics program is, most of the paramedics program is funded 50% by the province, 50% by the city. In our public health, 70% province, 30% city. So there is components of our budget that we do have funding coming down from our partners. Payment in lieu of taxes, again, that's another form of taxation. So the federal facilities, federal buildings, Crown Corporation buildings, they don't receive a tax bill. What they do is they basically send us money in terms of what we call payment in lieu of taxes. So it's a little different taxation regime. And then investment income, so we do have a department at the city where we do a lot of investments, so not like stock market investments, but we do issue a lot of municipal bonds. We incur debt on that, but it's a very strategic program that we leverage to get investment money that comes back into the system that helps us pay for all those things. On the capital side, so again, a portion of our property taxes do shift over to pay for the capital. Development charges is we say growth pays for growth. So if I go back to building a new house over there, I need to pay a fee to the city for permits and all that. And those permits help pay for the infrastructure to get to the house. So that's what development charges really funds. We do have federal provincial funding on our capital side, specifically on the transit system. We do get a lot of funding from the federal and provincials in terms of funding stage 1, stage 2. Debt, this is like basically your mortgage. So the municipal, from a provincial perspective, municipalities are allowed to have a debt level of 25%. City of Ottawa restrains that to 7.5%, and we roughly run around 5%. So that's a very fiscally restrained, conservative debt load that we manage, which is very low in terms of when we look at the global limits that's in place. And then, of course, the water utilities. Next slide. So again, we do have, what I say, 3 main tax levies in the rate program. So the citywide levy, that's our main property tax levy that funds your core services like your winter operations, your paramedics, recreational programs, staff, etc. The transit levy goes exclusively to transit. So any dollar collected from the transit tax funds transit. We cannot take that dollar and fund other services. Much like the police services budget, that is governed by the Police Services Act. That's provincial legislation that sets that authority. And again, that levy goes exclusively to the police services. So whatever taxation on your tax bill is allocated to police, that goes to police. We can't touch that. And the rate program is based on usage for the most part. Next slide. Again, some of these things I mentioned before. So 46% is the property tax bill. The payment in lieu of taxes is about another 4 or 5%. So that's how I get that 52% that I talked about. Again, some examples of the main core services that we fund from the tax supported programs. Your roads and maintenance, paramedics, community social services, etc. And again, some programs do have a mixture of funding from the province. This is where it gets a little bit complex and detailed. I can't take money from this provincial funding bucket and move it somewhere else. It really is that dollar's got Ottawa Public Health Road on it. That can only go there. I can't take from there. So it's really constrained in terms of how I move money around. Next slide. Again, transit levy. So our fiscal framework is the council endorsed framework dating back to 2007 timeframe. That framework suggests that 55% of the transit operating costs should be recovered from fares, through your ticket fares, and 45% through the levy. Today, the actual mix is more like 60% from the levy and 40% from the fare. So it's a little bit off in terms of what we target to achieve. On the transit capital side, we do get significant funding from provincial gas tax, federal gas tax, some good investments there. On the police side, again, that levy funds all the police investments, including the capital infrastructure. Next slide. Rate support program, again, this is for our water, wastewater, water. This is a very intensive, capital-intensive program, funds a lot of the infrastructure. We are coming forward with a revised rate structure in the new year. We're planning on coming forward in the fall with a framework, and then in the new year we're going to revisit that. We implemented a new structure in 18, 17 timeframe, can't recall exactly. Now we're coming back to refresh that and improve that, so that'll be coming forward next year. You'll see a report coming in the fall from a framework perspective. We're going to do lots of consultation, and then we'll come back in the new year with proposed change to that current structure. Next slide. User fees, again, this is where you go and pay for a service, so your swimming lessons, riding the bus, facility rentals, parking permits, parking fees, etc. This is where you're not taxed for it because you just basically pay for it if you use that service. So we're not going to charge you for swimming fees if you don't use it, essentially. So if you want to buy that service, that's your choice to do it, and you pay the fee, registration fees to do that, and that's where we get the user fee charges from. So basically, I'm going to move into the next section, which talks about the budget process and the development. The budget, I can tell you, the budget process for 2024 started immediately the day after the 2023 budget was approved, which was approved on March 8th. March 9th, our team, the finance team, started the process for the 2024 cycle. There's been lots of dialogue back and forth with councillors. There's been some public engagement early on in the year. Lots of work on the SLT general manager table to get us where we're at today in terms of the budget process. We do have a number of improvements, which I'll speak to in the later slides. We're trying to promote, engage, and kind of add more public engagement. This is probably one of the earlier times that I've been to a session before the budget is tabled, which is another form of engaging residents earlier. Then I'll move into term grants and priorities, and of course the meeting schedule as we get to November 8th and then get to December 6th. Next slide. Which I've seen this book, most of that's the next slide. So again, budget direction was approved on September 13th timeframe, I think. As the councillor mentioned, the direction from council was a tax increase of no more than 2.5%. Again, for me to build the budget, I need direction from council to give me the parameters of what to do. If not, it's an open season, and taxation could be 10% if I have no control. So it's important for me to get direction in terms of what the element should be, so I can go away and build that. On the rate side, that increases at 4.3%. We're always looking for new revenue ideas, new sources of revenue where we can. There's limitations, as I mentioned, in terms of the municipal act and what we can actually do. And then, of course, our user fees and charges should be cost recovered. So the cost of providing service should be recovered from the user fee structure. Next slide. Public engagement. So, right after the 2023 budget was approved, I had one-on-one sessions with every councillor. We did a resident survey in April timeframe. We took all that input. We kind of heard what we heard, made some changes to the process, which I'll speak to in the later slides. We are promoting more engagement. There's more advertising about our budget this cycle around, more billboards in our rec facilities, community centers. We're trying to display a bit more. We're using social media where we can to kind of push it out more often, and there's a variety of other vehicles that we're using. Next slide. So basically, November 8th, the budget is tabled. That's when all the details are there. Then we go through a series of committee meetings, as the councillor mentioned. I think the first committee meeting is November 15th, which is the Transit Commission. So every committee, you have the opportunity to come out and delegate, voice your opinion, and then ultimately that would rise, the final budget rises to council on December 6th for hopefully adoption and approval. Next slide. Again, this is kind of I think you have this slide deck, right? It's probably a good slide to circulate. There's some good details here. Our budget is based on committee structure. So each committee, as per the governance review, County Council governance, have authority in terms of recommending that budget to council. So all our budgets go to committee first. It's debated, public delegations come to committees. Once the committee approves that, it rises to council. So basically what this slide details out is all the city services. So as an example, fleet and roads goes to the transportation committee. So it's a good indication of what service goes where, as opposed to trying to figure out when you have to go to a certain committee. So it's a good detail. New this year, this term of council is the Emergency Executive Services Committee. That was reenacted this term of council. That's where your paramedics and fire would go. So again, so this is the city services to the community structure. Next slide. Enhancements. So there's a couple of new products that you're going to find on tabling day. One of the newest products is Our budget book is about 1,300 pages. It's very thick. There's a lot of detail in there. It's very transparent in the level of detail. We're going to move that into an online version, so we're still going to do a print book, but we're also going to put that on an online version, so ottawa.ca will have a link. It's a budget that's very interactive and intuitive, relatively easy to navigate through. It will be a little confusing at first, but it does have all the information there. At a click of a button, it gets different levels, right down from a user fee to a capital budget to all the details behind the capital budget. Another product that we're also adding to the mix this year is what we're flagging as a magazine. So it's a new product where we're actually breaking out more details, and we're using more metrics and benchmarks in terms of illustrating what we do. As an example, we're going to see in that book, winter operations, we're going to see a budget of X. This year's budget is 83 million. Next year's budget will be more. And it's going to speak to, we have over 12,000 lane kilometers in the city, talk about all the pieces of equipment, talk about the average number of snowfall that we receive, freeze rain cycles, etc. Just to contextualize, where does $83 million go? Well, when you look at 12,000 lane kilometers, over 200 centimeters of snow every season, over 40, 50 rain events over a winter season, kind of reflects, yes, it is an expensive operation, but it's the nature of our city and our demographic in terms of the widespread service that we have. So it seems like a big number, but that's the reality of living in Ottawa. We have a very complex winter climate, we have a large city, and it just takes that much to spend. So we're kind of breaking different metrics. I know paramedics and fire is always a hot topic. We do have some metrics on paramedics. So again, a new product, new version this year. We're going to build on that for next year's cycle, but it's a new level of information that we're giving out to the public this year, this cycle. Again, trying to make the budget more user-friendly, more readable, more relevant. That's the goal. This is a commitment that we made earlier in the process, that this is step one in the process, and we're going to build on that for the next cycle. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, we did run a one-on-one technical briefing, so we did do a very similar presentation to councillors, media. I did meet with media one-on-one, again, just to kind of give them more education in terms of understanding of how the budget process works. Next slide. Term of council priorities. So again, it's been a crazy year. 2 budgets in 1 year is never an easy task. You layer on top of that term of council priorities, and of course all the other things that's going on, like land solid waste master plan, goes on and on. Term of council priorities, these are the priorities that for this term our council has agreed to, 4 main themes. We're trying to link that in the budget as well where we can. Obviously, affordable housing is big there. Transit is another big one, and roads and infrastructure is also buried within some of those details. There is a separate document outlining all those details. It is on ottawa.ca for reference, but we will be speaking to that in the budget process as well. Next slide. As you can see, life is real busy real soon. We're in the final deep dive of building, compiling, consolidating all the information to table a budget. Ottawa Public Library, again, these are 2 boards, a little bit of a different governance structure from your city services. They table their budget just before us, Wednesday, November 8th, 10 o'clock in the morning. That's when we table the full budget, and then from there it really kicks off into a series of committee meetings and then ultimately finalization on December 6th for adoption. So this slide lays in all the dates, that previous slide where I showed all the committees and different city services. So between those 2, if you're of interest, these are the dates that come out. Please check ottawa.ca because I don't know if some of these dates may have changed. Sometimes dates do change. So you may want to have a quick look at ottawa.ca if you are planning to come to a committee meeting, if there's something of interest to delegate on. And that wraps up the basic process, and over to you guys for questions.
All right, we've wrapped up the presentation part, so now it's time to hear from you guys, and I know Ken usually has something to say, so why don't we start here and work our way this way?
Well, probably no surprise, I'd like to speak about roads. And I leave the council a discussion of the priorities of the individual roads, the deep repair within Ward 5. My concern is the entire system of roads and the extreme deteriorated state of many of them. A couple of weeks ago, the mayor was listening to him on the radio, and I tuned in late, and he was talking about the need to reinvest in our infrastructure, and how if we didn't, things would deteriorate and they would crumble. So I assumed he was talking about roads. No, he wasn't. He was talking about Lansdowne. But our roads are certainly deteriorating and crumbling. The city states as its one of its fundamental policies for infrastructure management that we maintain our infrastructure in a state of good repair. Now, city reports on the condition of our roads show that more than 50% of roads are in the poor state. So we've got an aspirational goal of keeping them in a state of good repair, and the reality is more than half are poor. Interesting statistic. But in terms of what that means to you and me, anybody who's driving a car, the experts will tell you that if your roads are in that general state of poor repair, it's costing you $300 extra per year for maintenance and repair. So we're talking about taxes and hidden taxes and fees. There's a hidden fee, there's a consequence for the poor condition of our roads. There was some hope in the last budget of Mayor Watson and Mayor Suckley's first budget that we were going to be putting more money into the roads budget. Mayor Suckley said he put in $100 million over 4 years. Well, the reality is, again, the experts will tell you, we need $100 million more every year, not 100 spread out over 4 years. So how are we going to get that sort of money? If the mayor trickles in this $100 million over 4 years, what's going to happen is our poor roads are going to get in a poorer condition. And once the roads are in poor condition, it's going to cost you 5 to 10 times more to fix them than had you fixed them when they just started to deteriorate. So bottom line, my recommendation is the mayor has promised $100 million over 4 years. Any money that wasn't committed last year, I would ask that the mayor put that money into roads maintenance for budget 2024.
You've got my support.
Sorry?
You've got my support.
Okay.
Are you planning on
Now I
coming
need
to
23 more votes.
the committee again this year? I agree. When you made your presentation at this year's, well, I guess it's last year's budget consultation, but the committee happened this year. Like you said, 2 budgets in 1 year. We often see the roads and the needs to invest in them as a rural issue, but it's actually a citywide issue. And I know that when you came to make your presentation, you had several urban and suburban councillors very interested in what you had to say. So I'm hoping that we can push that conversation along and position it as a citywide issue, not just a rural issue, because I think just the amount of driving we do and the amount of kilometers of road we have in the rural area, we see it more. But I drive down Carling every second Wednesday to get to council, and it's in a horrid condition. And I think one of the things I'm seeing, particularly at the committee presentation last year, I'm not on transportation, but during budget consultation I go to those meetings because it's so important. You see how much money is going into arterial roads, and that's good. It's good that we're repairing those, but I think we're still too slow to repair those, and with the majority of the money from the road resurfacing budget or maintenance budget going into arterial roads, you get the residential streets crumbling as a result. And I think you're right that it's...
But I think one of the failures of the Transportation Committee and the Council as a whole is they don't appreciate, you can't keep pushing that need for maintenance further down the road. So every time you push it down the road, it's going to cost you more to do. So anytime Council or the Transportation Committee is making decisions on the budget, they've got to understand the consequences, and the consequences of not adequately funding roads is going to mean that it's going to cost you more and more every time you underfund them.
Which is the same argument that's being used to sell the Lansdowne 2.0 project. So we can use that get more money for roads. I don't know if Cheryl wants to speak to any of that.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, like, keep in mind, like, my role, my responsibility is to, I take direction from council, and then I gotta make that work in a big massive bucket, right? And, you know, roads can be a priority here, transit can be a priority somewhere else, affordable housing, whatever, the list goes on. That's not for me to debate, so what I do is I work within the confines that I have, set by council and all of our financial plans, and that's how I make it work, right? If council wants to give me more money, then I can make more money go forward, but I can't make the same dollar go forward, so that's what I hear.
And then eventually there's going to have to be a discussion on where we cut or how much do we raise taxes. And I know there's discussions be happening at the city, we're doing a service review, and I'm hearing that there's some efficiencies being found. I don't know if you have a figure.
Well, so we are doing a pretty extensive, as part of the 23 process, we have done a service review. So we've been doing a lot of work with that team. There is a public component being released in November in terms of public engagement for ideas. This year we are looking at route optimization from the transit perspective. We're looking at our facilities and leases to see where there's opportunities to get out of facilities where we can, and we're looking at our fleet rationalization and transformation. What I can speak to tonight is that a great example of how we're really diligent at the city. So the automated speed cameras that you see, not so much in this area, but if you go into the urban areas more, you see it more in there. All those tickets today are basically, the camera takes the ticket goes to Toronto processes it, the ticket comes back. It's actually more efficient for us to do all that processing ourselves in-house. So we're actually standing at a team of about 30 people. If we were to go external and get a new facility, it would cost us about $1 million a year. In my department, what I've done, because I'm working from home, I was able to vacate some of my floor space. So I'm using the space that we already have as opposed to going out and leasing a new facility. That sold the city $1 million. That's an example of how we can be creative. On our fleet perspective, so fleet, that's all of our city trucks and vehicles. All that is under my responsibility. So what we're doing there is we're doing an extensive review in terms of standardizing our fleet where we can. So as opposed to having, you know, different versions of a Chevy truck, a Ford truck, a Dodge truck. If we standardize, that means less money we spend on inventory and parts. In some cases, I'm looking at, okay, if city staff is driving a F-150 today, do they need that, or can they drive a hybrid or electric small SUV? So just being a little bit smarter in terms of how we deliver service, no impact to service, but just being a little more efficient. So those numbers will be articulated in tabling. I can't release the numbers yet, but we're in the final stages. So, you know, taxes are going up, but I'm also trying to bring my cost down as well, to kind of make sure that we are still investing in core priorities.
Thank you, Ken.
I'd like to speak about the long-range financial plan, but I'll hold that until everybody
We'll
else.
come back to you. Who wants to go next?
speak?
We could go right across.
Well, my name's Len Stolwick. I just came here to listen, but you're talking about where to find money and save money. My first thing that comes to my mind is to stop giving it away. And I'm looking at the airport hotel, which wanted $10 million and got nothing, and now they're proceeding anyway. And the valuable lesson we can learn from that, viable projects will proceed even without government funding, so stop giving money away. And I'm hoping City Council is now going to re-examine any grants they're giving and saying, can this proceed without our money? Because if I were king, no government money would go from one private entity and be given to another private entity. That should be illegal, I think.
Well, that was a hot debate amongst councillors just a few months ago.
Good.
I'm happy to tell you that I voted against giving them the tax break. Council voted against giving them the tax break, and they still built the hotel just like all of the councillors who voted against the tax break thought they would.
So is there beginning to be a change of minds? Because I'm looking at Lansdowne, which, you know, they're looking at giving them, what, 500 million or something like that?
$419 million plan.
Yeah, and again, to take from, I have no choice, I must pay my taxes. So for you to take my money and give it to a private entity, that should be illegal.
Two things I'll address there. Yes, council is reviewing that. That was one of the very first things, and something the mayor ran on, was reviewing the CIP and brownfield projects, so those tax grants. I think many people will remember think it was an Audi dealership or a Porsche
Porsche
dealership. Yes,
Yes.
and I don't know whether that was a greenfield, I think it was a brownfield, came before my time. So there's two separate streams there. The one at the airport was just and you probably know more, is that just a straight CIP, like?
Yeah, so when the CIP program was created, we started off as brownfields, then we created a specific one for the airport because they were trying to basically grow the airport up to be more of a business attraction. So the goal at the time was investing in that area would attract more flights, attract more investment for distribution, et cetera, et cetera. Not to interject here, but that was one of the priorities where the mayor did say stop that. That report is coming actually in 2 weeks to FinCorp. So that program has basically been scrutinized, reviewed thoroughly by staff, and the final recommendations come in 2 weeks' time. So that will come in terms of where council decides to move forward with that program.
So yes, we are reviewing that. And I see those two things as being different. So the brownfield one is a little more attractive to me. So that's where a company gets a tax break to remediate the land. So let's say there used to be a gas station there and they walked away from it and the land is contaminated. So somebody has to pay for remediating
They
that.
knew it was contaminated when they bought it.
Sure, but we could also sit there and just let it sit for 100 years and then nothing gets done with it. So I'm a little more sympathetic to that argument, but certainly the airport one was a no-go for most of
Land
council.
value has increased sufficiently that it's worth it for them to take care of remediation.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be tax dollars doing that, but anyway.
And then the one nuance on Lansdowne is that's not, so there is private developers or OSEGs involved in that, but the city actually owns that land.
Yeah, I
So
was
that's-
reading some of the details. There's assumed to be a hotel that's going to be booked at 100% capacity for 10 years in order to achieve the numbers in the,
There's a lot of assumptions baked into the plan.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be things have been so busy recently, I haven't really had a chance to sit down and review all those numbers. I'm meeting with the mayor of Lansdowne on Monday, so.
It needs some correction.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to know if the mindset is evolving.
It is.
Good.
Yeah. Judy, you got anything?
Sure, of course. I echo the concerns of my previous constituents. I want to ask about climate change. I mean, I don't know to what extent you can drill down to specific committee level budgets or departmental, but we know there's a climate emergency and we hear about this all the time. I don't need to go on with that. As Clark knows, we've had our fair share here in West Carleton, and there's a local not-for-profit group of volunteers who are working very hard to help West Carleton to be more prepared. We fundraise to pay our own insurance bills, so we're just doing this on our own time. I'm really looking for some serious infrastructure development, some planning. We need a disaster plan. We just saw what happened in West with the forest fire. Park Hills are just a stone's throw away from here. There's a fire, my village would be evacuated, for instance. So I'm just wondering where I would find that and how I can respond to that. I just wonder where that's at.
So in the main committee would be the Environment Committee. There is a program we established this year, 2023 budget, a specific $5 million investment towards climate change, but there's much, much more. So when I look at my fleet budget, typically we spend around $25–30 million a year in replacing our fleet, and the direction that I've given my staff is wherever you can, you go electric first, then you go hybrid, and then of course you're restricted to diesel or gas. There's no electric snowplow, so we are restricted to that. So wherever we can, we do invest in hybrid electric vehicles as an example. Obviously, there's a big program right now with our transit in terms of the zero-emission buses. There's 4 in place today. I think there's roughly another 20 or so coming. The light rail system, that's the biggest investment the city can do. That's over $7 billion when you take stage 1 and stage 2. That's the biggest impact we do as a city from a city of Ottawa organization. More buses off the street, electric trains. It's definitely a carbon footprint. Lansdowne. Lansdowne is a city asset. It is a energy hog. It's obviously a failing infrastructure. Any investment there would improve that in terms of a greening perspective. In the last 6 years, we invested well over 25 million plus in converting over 70,000 streetlights in the city of Ottawa from the halogen light to the LED light. So again, we spend millions of dollars every year in terms of our infrastructure. The infrastructure plan, there's a new asset management plans coming forward in 2024 and 2025. All those new plans will be informing climate change initiatives. So we're making sure the climate change lens is applied to all capital programs and infrastructure that we invest in going forward. So there's a big investment in climate change across the board.
And where can I see those listed if I can't wait fast enough to?
So part of the challenge is, like, if you go to the, obviously I know it's already read it, but in my transportation committee, if you go into the fleet budget section, there's a capital program there, you're going to see the $30 million investment into what we call fleet life cycle. All that $30 million, I could argue, is truly for, it benefits climate change, because any vehicle I replace today is basically replacing a vehicle that's either 5, 10, 12, 15 years old. So even if I replace a gas fire truck today with a 15-year-old gas fire truck, that is more efficient today because technology is involved on the gas perspective. But I don't call that out and say that's a $30 million climate change because it's still gas, right? But I don't break out of that 30 million. I don't break it. I'm going to spend 5 million in gas vehicles, 5 million in electric, because the supply and demand issue that we have in the market is sometimes we go to buy an electric vehicle, it doesn't exist because of the delay there. I just recently secured 5 electric F-150s 2 weeks ago, so I told my team just go grab them. We have the money for that. So you're not going to see specific dollars. Last year what we did in the budget was we called out, medium, high, low impact in terms of climate resiliency and climate adaptation. So we're trying to build that out more. We're trying to build the tools where we can actually measure GHG emissions, but we're not quite there yet. So this budget will have some improvements, but we're still working towards further enhancing how we track, capture, and report on climate change.
Thank you for doing that.
I got a couple of questions. At the beginning of the slides, it said that you're required to present a balanced budget. But the budget at the end of the year is never balanced. So what mechanism is in place? Like if we have a surplus, what happens to it? If we have a deficit, how do we pay that?
So basically, we have what we call reserves, which effectively is your savings account. So one of our main reserves is what we call a tax stabilization reserve. So I have a bucket of money that sits there, that stays there for those issues. So for 2022, as an example, we finished the year with probably around a $6 or $7 million deficit, which is very, very small in a $4.7 billion enterprise. And where do I take that money from? I got to go into my reserves and take money out. In 2022, we absorbed $20 million worth of direct costs. We had a harsh winter season in the back end. So whenever we go through the year, I do monthly reporting where like this year, I put in a spending freeze and a hiring freeze in May because we had a very harsh winter. But at the end of the year, if I'm in a surplus where I have money left over, that goes into my tax stabilization reserve, my savings account. If I have a deficit, I take it out of that account. Over the past 10 years, I would say probably 7 or 8 of those years we've had surpluses, and maybe 1 or 2 of those years we had deficits. So we are a really diligent organization in terms of being fiscally responsible. So that's where we found it.
So in this climate right now with high interest rates, families are going to be dealing with some pretty serious financial issues in the next 16, 18, 20 months. And that's going to affect their spending dollars. And I'm sure as family, they're sitting around the table and say, what can we no longer afford? Even though you want it, what can we no longer afford? do we have a mechanism within the city to say, how do we establish what we can no longer afford?
So that's where that continuous improvement, service review, option work that we do. So we know latest figures from an inflation perspective has got inflation around 2.8%. So some of the debate around council is, well, can you afford a 2.5% tax if things are going up more? 48% of our costs are tied to staff salaries. It is a unionized environment. We have over 13 collective agreements. Most of our collective agreements are settled, which means that there's contracts in place for around 2% or less. So again, that's a big opportunity for us because salaries are up by 2%, taxes are up by 2.5%. Fuel is a big cost for us. We actually edge our contracts. So my investment team, we go out and buy contracts, edging contracts, investments into firms, or we can lock the price of diesel. So right now, I think I pay, don't quote me on numbers tonight, but I pay around $1.46 or so a liter for diesel. Check the pumps, it's $1.70, right? So we'll be very strategic in terms of how we do that. On the capital side, capital construction inflation has come down quite a bit. So most of our commodities are basically, inflation is on a 1-to-1. So we do it by commodity, by service. So that's how we can kind of fit in. To your point, from a resident perspective, I think that's what's proven about this budget is, we are restraining the tax increase to 2.5, and how I make that work is I look at ways, as I mentioned, in terms of continuous improvement. I do things smarter and more efficient without impacts to service. As I mentioned with the fleet review, as I mentioned with facilities, there's a facility, I live in Stittsville, so it's a community center, Pretty Street, it's been vacant for quite some time. Council approved the demolition of that facility. Just around the corner, we have the CRC facility, so that facility was not being used or optimized. So we get rid of that asset. It means we don't need to invest in that asset. We can sell that piece of property for money, generates money into the system. So the city is continuously doing improvements in how we deliver services. That's part of the equation and balance the expenditures.
I'll just expand on that a bit too. One of my colleagues at the last council meeting gave notice of motion, and I don't have the wording of the motion in front of me. In fact, I forgot about it until you asked your question, but Councillor Brown from Reno Jock is going to, I guess we're going to be debating it Wednesday, I think. And again, I don't know the exact wording of the motion, but the spirit of the motion was directing staff to come back with, out of the budget, how much of that is going towards funding core services alone, like road resurfacing, road maintenance, plow, garbage pickup. So I think where council is heading with that, certainly where Councillor Brown's heading with that, and I would be supportive of that. And as you could tell from my opening remarks, I'm very focused on core services. And one of the reasons I'm doing that is when I took over this office, there was a lot of stuff left around from my predecessor's days, going all the way back to amalgamation. And I got in my hand here a list of services that used to be available out of this West Carleton community complex. It's quite comprehensive. You've got client services, development, public works, fire services, the councillor, of course, public health, solid waste, maintenance, booking, police services, street lighting. We had someone here who could talk to you just about street lighting. Bylaw, forestry, traffic, tile drainage. So I think I think council's interested in looking at how much of our money is going towards delivering those core services that people absolutely expect from the municipality versus how much money is going elsewhere. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. I have one question. I want to follow up, Tim. Do we ever have several years in a row that we're using our reserves?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say
In the last 10 years, let's say?
I wouldn't say 10 years, or no, there hasn't been a systemic year over year. One of the main drivers, previous to the pandemic, previous to the last couple of years, we've had successive, emergencies. Winter operations is always the one that goes up and down, but in In 2020, as an example, we had a surplus in our operations. 2021, we had a surplus. 2022, we were on balance. But if I go back to 2015 timeframe, we had a $24 million deficit in our operations. We were able to absorb most of that through other savings, but we haven't dipped into our reserves very frequently. And we have a healthy reserve balance right now.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Councillor Kelly, for having this, and the city staff for coming out tonight to interact with the residents and to hear our concerns. My name is Stephanie Magna, and I'm a resident of West Carleton March. My concern that I've been hearing from countless community members is housing. And it's not only a crisis throughout our city, but it's so much more so for rural areas and rural communities. And as you know, Councillor Kelly, our rural areas of Ottawa make up over 80% of the city of Ottawa, and we want residents here to serve that portion for the budget to be dedicated to housing, to serve our rural communities. And, you know, it's just so important right now at a time when we have, you know, vulnerable community groups and individuals and members of marginalized groups, including our elders and our youth that are really leading our communities in droves. And West Carleton is such a big economic driver for our city. We want it to remain that way, but we need to be able to help support the families and residents that do live here that are looking for housing, but also safe housing and housing that is inclusive for women and for younger families that are wanting to start that early start in their life and gaining that independence. $20 million is from what I understand what the budget is for the entire city for housing. Can you touch base a little bit on that and provide us some...
For sure. So first of all, I acknowledge that I heard a lot about housing. Housing was a topic of conversation during the campaign, as I'm sure you're aware. And it's not just a city or urban or suburban issue. It just looks a bit different in the rural areas. You're right, it's an issue out here. You know, the saddest part for me, especially someone my age, I know a lot of people who grew up here but can't afford to stay in West Carleton, and that's a problem in my opinion, and something that we do need to address. How we do that though, I think is a challenge and is up for debate, and because I know the city's focus when it comes to affordable housing is putting it in places that's serviced by transit. I think that's a huge aspect of the affordable housing strategy for the city of Ottawa, so I think that's the number one challenge in getting those dollars siphoned out to rural areas like West Carleton. The transit aspect of that and the need for people who require affordable housing to have access to transit is generally there, but as someone who grew up in this community, I can agree with you that it's not the be-all and end-all of affordable housing and that there is needs out here. I'm on the Planning and Housing Committee, and I'm also on the Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation. There's three councillors plus the mayor on that board. I've taken the time to meet with 2 or 3 groups in the city who are working at affordable housing initiatives, not-for-profit housing corporations, and I think rather than the city building homes, for me, and that's why I'm excited about my role on the Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation, is that, and you have your money guys like Cyril who might disagree. I don't know if he disagrees with this or not, but the city has property and assets at its disposal that it decides when and how to sell or how it disperses that. So when there's a piece of land up for sale from the city, or a piece of property that the city's decided it hasn't used in 50 years, it has no use for it, how do we utilize this asset to the best of our ability? So that's the job of the Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation. And I would like to see us giving those assets, providing those assets, whatever the language is that we use that's appropriate, selling it to them for $1 or a low amount. So, and this has been the crux of the conversation that I've had with these organizations. So rather than trying to build units with $16 or $20 million a year, when you really break out what you're able to achieve with that, it's not going to do the job. It's not going to build the number of housing units that we need to serve our city, including the rural areas. But if you give them an asset to use, they can go to the bank with that. They can borrow money, they can leverage that. And then all of a sudden they're able to compete with the Mintos of the world in that space. So when they see a property for sale that they can grab and build affordable housing on it, they have the ability to do that. They don't need to come to the city and go, oh, I need $8 million more and I need it in the next 24 hours, otherwise someone else is gonna buy that property. So for me, I think that's the best way forward in terms of giving those organizations the ability to build those houses. What I see on a weekly basis or every 2 weeks at the Planning and Housing Committee is that we are approving development, and those are the applications that are before us. And I am working on an inquiry that will inquire, how many, first of all, what is our definition of affordable? Because I don't believe the city's definition of affordable is actually affordable housing. So correct, Cyril might know different, but I think our definition of affordable housing is market rent, is it not?
Yeah, so it's based on CMHC, so we leverage the CMHC definition, which is 80% of affordable market value, which we know that that's not affordable, right? It's market value today is probably around, don't quote me, $2,500 for a 2-bedroom apartment, so 80% of that, call it 2,000, that's not affordable, right? That's the definition that we got to go by, because CMHC is the experts. We also talk about deep affordability, which brings it down to 60%. But that's the supply and demand side of the equations where development is right now.
I think the frustrating part for me, particularly as a member of that committee, is that we constantly deal with applications that are for buildings that are not going to have affordable housing while we're facing an affordable housing crisis, but those are the applications that we have before us. So it's going to have to be a combination between market forces and support from governments to make sure those units are built. So that's where my head's at when it comes to affordable housing and how to address it. So I think it's a longer term, tougher conversation, but for sure I think it's an issue that we need to deal with out here, and I want people who grew up in West Carleton to be able to stay here.
Sure. Councillor Kelly, are you referring to land that's available already and owned by the city of Ottawa? Does that include just vacant land or buildings that perhaps are decommissioned?
A good question. Mostly we've been discussing vacant land, but I believe the city is in ownership of some buildings that...
Yeah, so that's part of the service we are going through what we call the facilities rationalization, so we're looking at all the structural assets. We don't have a lot of facilities that are vacant. We have Pretty Street was an example of one, so that's one where...
Sorry, which one?
Pretty Street, so in Stittsville, there's a... Are you familiar with Stittsville?
Yeah.
You know where Equator Coffee is?
Yeah.
Just down there, there's just on the corner of Pretty Street, there was a community center that was there for years. It's in bad condition. So finally, council approved basically demolishing that facility. So that facility will come down. Then the city does sell land. 25% of the proceeds got to go into affordable housing, so into the housing budget. That's the policy. So that's one avenue of we sell the land for market value. We make the investment back into affordable housing. So that's how we kind of treat land sales. We do have a lot of land across the city. We don't have a lot of, we probably don't have any vacant buildings, or not too many.
Okay. Any numbers on emergency housing or safe housing or spaces for people in the rural areas? It's a need that goes along with just affordable housing, just the importance of safe spaces for women, for LGBTQ plus members, for even our elders that just, for whatever reason, need to have that safe space. Do we have any numbers on those? Because, we don't have very many. We have literally a few dozen of co-op housing, I understand, and that's it for the entire rural area, and that's a lot of folks that are being left behind and turning away and leaving. Teenagers are couch surfing in the city, leaving for sometimes years because they can't find something safe to stay that is supportive.
Your best, I would circle back with Clara and Paul. Paul, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they can get those numbers for you. Again, but I'll say that my biggest challenge of my job is when I go to work, when I leave my house in the morning, I don't talk politics. My role is to be the financial stewardship of the organization, along with my other accountabilities. But one of my big frustrations as a treasurer and CFO is, our provincial and federal partners, they don't invest like they should. The federal government came out with a significant announcement in terms of what they're going to invest in affordable housing, and we're gridlocked. We put in an application for $150 million, and it's being debated. Whereas if you just gave us $150 million, we'll have shovels in the ground tomorrow, and we can do something. So my frustration is at the municipal level, we need to action things ASAP, but we're gridlocked with our partners up above because politics don't fund to you or anything else, but it's a systemic issue. If you gave me $150 million, they've earmarked, I think it's $3 billion. If you gave me $150 million tomorrow, I guarantee that Claire and my team on the housing side have substantial infrastructure across the city. Another example on a provincial level, earlier this year, Toronto got, don't quote me on numbers, but they got to the tune of $40 million. They gave us $700,000.
700,000.
So again, it's a system, right? There's money in the system. It's just the process and the bureaucracy of how it flows to where it is. Right? So that's the challenges we deal with. It's not easy, but it is a systemic issue.
Do you have just any numbers on how many decommissioned buildings or vacant land the city of Ottawa holds right now that could be potentially converted?
Again, so this is just, you can flip me an email and I can coordinate, but kind of touched on different services.
Thank you.
I don't have those numbers, but we will.
Thank you very much.
A rough idea of that.
Chris?
Hello, my name is Chris Carson. I'm a local Carver resident. I've got, there's a notion that there are many local residents who are concerned with the inadequate water supply and inadequate water quality in the village of Carver, as well as the sewer supply. Our community is in dire need of upgrades to these services, and in order to properly support our homes and businesses, as well as ensure healthy growth and future residences and building. How can we ensure these issues are being addressed properly in the short and long-term budgetary plans of the municipality?
I would say the best avenue would be through Tammy. So she's our general manager of infrastructure. She oversees the RAID program and all the infrastructure related to that. Best question for her. We do have substantial investments in the RAID program. From my perspective, I reached a long-range financial plan for RAID. That program is fully funded. Where that falls in terms of their criteria, what needs to be done is probably best for her to circle back to where it is in their plan.
And obviously, this has been an ongoing conversation for a little while, and I see Roddy Bolivar in the audience tonight, and he's the head of the Carp Road Corridor BIA, and we hear from Roddy once in a while about servicing the Carp Road Corridor with water and sewer, and to attract businesses into the Carp Road Corridor, and I think that's important. Economic development is important, so we're looking at transportation options and water and sewer options through the Carp Road Corridor. When it comes to the village, that's something we hear about on a regular basis, the water quality, the interruptions in delivering those services. So oftentimes the communal well system will need upgrades of this matter or this sort, and it takes this amount of time, and that happens on a pretty regular basis. So I know in the 2023 budget there was about $1 million put into the communal well system in Carp. Seems a bit patchworky to me in terms of every couple of years we put $1 million or so into the system. And as some of you may know, it pumps to the airport development overnight. So I think there are some big stresses on that system. To get back to housing, the city has a plan to intensify in rural villages, which I think has to be done correctly and in a way that doesn't hurt the character of our rural villages. But of course, when you're in a housing crisis, you have to build houses. So servicing them with water and sewer capacity, I think, is a huge issue, particularly in Carp. I think it makes sense if we're going to talk about running services down the Carp Road Corridor that we extend it a little bit further into the village so that we can have quality water, sewer, infrastructure. That is something that we discussed, that I have sat down with Tammy about. Now, that wasn't the only thing we sat down to discuss, but there will be people, you know, Roddy and Chris, you'll be involved as well. I'll send you the invite. We are organizing a meeting with water and infrastructure staff to talk about that very issue. And one of the things I've asked from staff, or let them know that what I want to get out of this, because oftentimes we sit down with staff and lots is discussed, but there's not really any next steps, particularly on that issue, because I know it's been going on for a while. So when I spoke with Chris Rogers the other day about that potential meeting, I asked him, when we're done this next meeting, I would like some very clear steps. Like, do you need to go and canvass all the businesses in the corridor or people in the village to get their buy-in? And then maybe we come back to the city. So I'd like some solid steps that we can follow as a community to achieve those goals. And so that remains an issue that we talk about on a weekly basis in that office. And it is something that I brought to the attention of Cyril and Wendy and Mayor Sutcliffe when I sat down with them for budget consultation meetings earlier this month. To be continued. Sir?
Yeah, I think most of the topics of interest to me have been covered. I'm land between. I live about 2 kilometres from here on the Kirk Road, so I know very well the main bump, the bowl, and
Yep.
so on, and the costs associated with fixing the car. So I just like clarification. It says here on the priority list, the village to Kinburn Side Road, 1 to 2 years. I'd like to see it happen in 1 to 2 years.
Me too.
But it says on the other side, it's a candidate, the first 6 kilometers is a candidate. What does that mean?
So what you have there is 2 different lists. You have our list from the Ward 5 office on the front. So that's what we hear from residents on a continuous basis, and that's how we've established that list. The second list is what the infrastructure and roads people are currently looking at and the current timeline. So there's a conversation going back and forth between my office and staff on what roads are what priority and from where to where we need. So I can tell you that when I met with Tammy Rose, she's the GM of infrastructure, and I raised Carp Road from the village to Kinburn Side Road because it's just absolutely atrocious, and anyone who drives over it knows that. I asked them when that would be resurfaced, and they sent back an email saying it's funny how they word things. It won't happen within the next 1 to 4 years. So they didn't have it on their plan for 5 years. I sent back a fairly polite but direct email about how important that road was for the residents. Like, that's a main arterial road where people drive from Fitzroy Harbor all the way to the highway.
There's a lot of heavy traffic
Yes.
on that right now,
Yeah.
big trucks.
But so they've moved that up the list. So if we keep doing that and getting, so what happened there, I think, was I shot back and they said, oh, well, we better get out there and have a look at it. And a couple weeks later, we got an email saying, we've moved it up the list after further consideration. So that's why evenings like this are so important, just to reinforce those things. And I think, you know, councillors are elected and paid to represent their constituents. So the city might have a set of criteria in which they use to identify key roads of, you know, where they want to resurface or where they want to repair. But I think sometimes that just doesn't mesh with what the community needs or wants or what we're hearing. So that's what you're seeing with those 2 different lists, is just the city versus what we think and what we're hearing from the community. So at a certain point, I'd like to see more of what we've identified moved over onto that list, and that's what we're working on.
And I'd like to see it extended to the Kinburn side.
Oh, for sure, yes. It's just as bad at that end as it is at this end. So.
Gary Johnson, I live in rural Carp.
Rural Carp, all right.
Yeah, Carp is not rural enough. My first meeting, I apologize, it may be a naive question, but on the macro view, it strikes me that rural is so much different than urban. And urban, or the rural, is subsidizing all sorts of things that take place in the city. Transit, of course, is a huge one. I don't have any access to transit. I have to drive significant portions to get there. Water treatment, I have my own well, I have to deal with that. And there seem to be so many other things that are different. How is a rural resident taxed the same as an urban resident? Maybe this is going back to amalgamation. And has there ever been talk about different rates for rural versus urban?
So there are different rates, and so we don't pay the transit levy. We pay, Lisa, we pay the, oh, she's not there.
We're in
This is-
rural transit area B.
Yeah, so,
It's paratransport only.
yeah, so we pay for paratransport. We don't pay for any other transportation. And same with the water. So there's no, you have a sewer and a well, so you don't pay a water bill. You do pay a stormwater management fee though. And that's a topic of further debate and was a fairly controversial issue when it first came up. Here, Trans Capital, I'm not going to try to understand that on the fly. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Where were we?
There is a good page on the website, the city website, that shows the difference between what rural residents pay compared to urban residents by category. So we'll break it down, emergency services, library.
So you don't pay you don't pay for transit effectively. You really reduce rate. Your fire is a little less because you have a lot of volunteer fires in the area. You don't pay a water bill or a wastewater bill. You do the charge for stormwater because the water that falls in the road ends up in the stormwater system. So it is a reduced rate for rural services. The irony is, I did a consultation last night in the urban area, and the interesting for me. So I grew up in a very rural. I'm from Newfoundland. Grew up in a very rural, 4 small communities, total population 1,200. So I get it. We had to drive an hour to get to a restaurant, so I understand what rural is. Last time we did an urban consultation, and their argument was they pay more taxes than subsidized in rural area. So there is a ward in downtown area. I won't call it a ward. It's public information. You all look it up. They basically contribute the most from the property tax bill. So they feel like they're subsidizing the ones. Right? Yes. so again, and the reason why they pay more taxes is because that's the largest concentration of commercial facilities. So by default, they do pay the most taxes. But it also costs us much more to clear snow in Somerset Ward because every time it snows, we have truck snow out. Right? We don't truck snow over the rules. So there's always that debate where, it's always interesting where last night, they talk about, okay, we should be investing $0 in roads. We're subsidizing everything else, and then you come here tonight and you go to the opposite side. So just for context.
How are private roads determined? For example, you talk about snow clearing. Private roads clear their own snow.
It's based on the network in terms of, give me an example of a private road.
Well, off the airport, Carp Airport, all that district in there is private roads.
Yeah, so
Avenue Estates.
So it's private, right? It's not a city road, so we wouldn't clear that.
But what determines what is a city road when a development's being made?
So maybe I understand your question, but that's a private-owned land. I don't have the right, technically I shouldn't be driving up that street, so why would I clear that city service, right?
So I think, and this is, I know what your question is, so, because we deal with this all the time. We get calls regularly being, I think, Jim, you live on a private road, right? Yeah. And it causes issues. I don't know how it's determined. Corey, do you?
I can give you an idea of why 1 or 2 may have been, but I don't know if there's like a framework that covers all of them.
And I think some of it is, that's a symptom of a city that's been put together through amalgamation. So the city owns property in West Carleton, and I've asked why they own it, and they have no idea. The only reason is that West Carleton owned it, and now West Carleton's part of Ottawa, so now Ottawa owns it. And I think, Chris?
I think a lot of them are created when a subdivision is first created, and the developer will create a subdivision, and it'll be under a set of rules. Maybe it's condominium, or maybe they create an association for the residents of that area, like the airport, I think is under an association. They that work within themselves. It's usually when the the subdivision is actually created that will determine the single-family.
Why would they ever want to do that?
It's a cost thing for the residents and the developer. From my understanding, it costs the city less, so they're more to create a private road. So then the city is more incentivized to then give the developer the rights to develop a private residential area.
Yeah, so just to keep things on track, any new subdivision, basically, that becomes part of the network that comes into the city. So if we were to put a subdivision over here, I'm not aware of any subdivision that would be built where it's a privately owned subdivision. Obviously, if it's a subdivision of condominiums, then that falls under the condo. Usually condominium association takes care of the maintenance of that bit there. I suspect what we're referring to here is probably some legacy thing that probably dates back grandfather and things. I'm not sure, I can't speak to it, but I would email the question through city staff and get an answer for you. But is that a common practice that I'm aware of?
I was just going to say now to get into the weeds a little bit, if you gave me an opportunity question.
Absolutely, go ahead. Floor is yours.
As far as private road goes, I live on the end of McCarthy Road, which is over here. Half of it, it's on a public road allowance. No question about that, public road allowance, 66 feet wide, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Half of it is maintained by the city. The other half is not, nor will they. But that's another thing. But, so it was, as far as I can determine, it was created back one of those cottage developments you're talking about, or that type of thing, where the road was opened up by the developer, okay, 50, 60 years ago in our case. And so it's not built to any particular, it may have been built to the standards of the time, but it doesn't meet their standards now, okay? So we're stuck in Never Never Land on part of it. They were quite happy to, we blow the snow, clear the snow off, and that's okay, that's not an issue. But the maintenance of the road in some areas is an issue because it gets into grading and stuff like that, which is more than a few cottages really should have to pay. But that's a private public road allowance with an unmaintained road, which is not the same, but almost the same as a private road. Okay, the public road not maintained by the city, and that's as far as it goes. Anyway, there's many of those in Ontario that have been developed privately and never taken over, and now what to do.
I think that's another to be continued discussion. Yeah.
Probably.
Lot of that question, I'm curious.
Roddy?
Good thing. Friday Boulevard, Ottawa Business Association. So I always come to budget and encourage economic development in the city. And we've been waiting, the city is preparing a new economic development strategy. We've been waiting anxiously for it to come out. But 4 or 5 years ago, the city did do a rural economic development strategy. And since then, the city has budgeted the Rural Affairs Office, but has not put any capital behind the rural economic development strategy. And the strategy had nice, clear ideas. And so promoting rural economic development, the relationship between our business area, which is kind of light industry, versus the general rural area, the agriculture. There's so many economic development opportunities in rural Ottawa. And many of those relate to urban Ottawa. You know, how much money and economic development crosses that rural-urban border. And so we'll be showing up in committee with a couple ideas of a capital spending idea that would implement the city's rural economic development strategy. The only reason we haven't come to date is because we're waiting on the new city economic development strategy. I'm in contact with the 2 city staff leads on that. Any day now. And we're really anxious to see how the rural economic development strategy is part of the city's economic development strategy. So if we don't see the economic development strategy before the budget meetings, I'll kind of have to show up and say, here's a good idea, and maybe they already thought about it. If the economic development strategy report does come, then we can leverage off that. So we'll be in front of you at budget time to advocate for some, instead of just operational spending to fund a couple people in the Rural Affairs Office, some actual capital behind rural economic development.
Just while we're on the topic of presenting to committees, something I should have mentioned in my opening remarks, as the draft budget moves its way through committees, if there's delegations that you would like to make I'm not sure if we've dispersed it tonight or whether we'll get it out to you, but so yes, got a list here, one of the slides from Cyril's presentation, so which committee deals with what. So if you want to come and make a delegation, I would encourage you to do that. That helps me as your counselor greatly, and I'm willing to work with you beforehand, before the committee, so I can show up, and if you don't get everything you want out in that 5-minute presentation, I can ask relevant questions that will help you get out the information you would like, and we can work together to influence the budget and the outcomes during those committee meetings. And if anyone has time to chat with Ken Holmes after the meeting, he does this on a regular basis and is an expert at presenting to committee and the work we do beforehand to not engineer particular outcomes, but work together to get the outcome that we would like as residents of Ward 5. You're good? All right. Yes. Isaac?
Just a quick question. Well, I think we'll touch on. But my main one was, has the bill, what was it, 23?
Bill 23, Bill 109, there's a couple of
For Councillor province, where they cut developer fees?
Yeah.
Has that had an impact yet, or a measurable impact, or?
So that's what we're going through right now, so it could impact as much as $60 million a year to our budget. We do have a new development background study coming in April, so we're going to pull that analysis through that report. But again, that's another example of, not my opinion, but the reality of provincial legislation pushing things down to us where it could create a $60 million gap in our budget overall. So that work is being done and hopefully addressed through the 2024 development background study.
In terms of percentage, what does that represent-ish for local development fees on a daily basis?
That's a good question.
Is 60 mil the sort of the annual, or?
That's annual.
Okay.
So it's
I won't quote you on anything, I'm just curious.
yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Like, there's a lot of numbers up here.
For sure.
I mean, I can pull back through the counselor, but it's material, it's significant.
Yeah, okay. And then vacant land tax, has that, I guess this is the first year, has that produced any numbers in terms?
I thought I was moving away technically. So right now, yes, I mean, obviously our projections, we had a memo in June, it was debated in August, I believe, there was a motion to actually cancel the program. The numbers are coming in higher than projected, which is basically on the trend to other city models. All that money will go right into the affordable housing. So anything generated from the VUT, the vacant unit tax, is directly funded to affordable housing. So that is the benefit of it. I know it's a little bit contentious depending on where you fall in your opinion. What I can say is we have, my staff are strong supporters in terms of supporting anybody that have questions. There's obviously been some little bit of bumps in the road within any program, but it has been what I would say a successful program specifically for investing that money directly into affordable housing. And keep in mind, every unit that gets back into the stock it's a contribution towards the supply, which helps the supply and demand equation, which helps affordable housing in an indirect way.
What were those projected numbers?
So in the first year, we were projecting about 6 million. Looks like we're on track to be just over 10. But that will taper down, right? It's a new program, so there's certain appeal process and audit things that we're going through. It's 1%. Toronto was just last week, they put forward a proposal where they're going to increase theirs to 3%, which generates over 300 million for that. So again, much more liberal in there in terms of their taxation, but it's a program that seems to be effective.
Vancouver as well, I understand.
Yeah, Vancouver as well.
And will the program pay for the program itself first before then going into the affordable housing programs?
Yeah, so in the first year, I think we're roughly going to generate about 6.1, 6.2 million. There is about $1 million of the cost and then a bit for administration, which that administration cost will go down. So in the first year, we projected about 4.4 going into affordable housing. That number's getting closer to 10 net. The cost will come down, and the revenue projections are expected to stabilize around 7 million or so in year 3, year 4. Because it's a behavior change, right? It's changing behavior, so the numbers will come down a bit, but that's the projections.
Well, should we start back at the beginning with Karen?
Roads.
Just a quick comment on an activity that the city gets terribly involved in that really drives the budget, and that's the long-range plans, specifically the long-range financial plan. And that really is the main hindrance as to why we're not getting enough money into the annual budget to finance the roads. So the simple question is, when is the next edition of the long-range plan coming out? Because it's now 2.5 years delayed, and almost every report that we see, there's another reason why it should be, or there's going to be delayed. I think there are more reasons why it needs to be expedited. And looking specifically at roads, I want the discussions around the council table with respect to the long-range financial plan for councillors to understand the consequences of not significantly increasing the funding. Right now, we look back at an old financial plan and say the only way we can do anything better is to add these little increments of 10 and 20 million and hoping that's going to solve the problems. And it doesn't solve the problems. We've got to get right into the fundamentals of maintaining our $13 billion worth of road infrastructure and have that identified clearly in the long-range financial plan that we need $260 million a year, not 130. We need 260. And if we don't put the 260 in the long-range financial plan, then year after year, as the road continues to deteriorate, there's another 50 million that you need to repair those poor and very poor roads because you didn't get at them when the stitch in time saved 9. So, do you know when the financial plan is coming out?
Yeah, so our last ones were done in 2017, 2018. Our normal cadence would be every 4 years. So 2 things happened. These are not excuses, these are realities. 2 things happened in 2020. This pandemic thing happened, so that obviously changed the world and changed every city service. And then provincial legislation came out where they changed the requirements. So the requirements is basically by 2025, every municipality is required to do what they're calling asset management plans, so it's called AMPS. So as before, we would do a long-range financial plan for tax services, a long-range financial plan for rate services. Now we're going to be doing asset management plans for roads. We're going to do an asset management plan for solid waste. We're going to do an asset management plan for buildings. So it's basically more detailed plans. They're required by 2025, so you'll start seeing those come in the latter part of 24 and in 2025. So those
It's encouraging to see that the province is insisting that we do that, but this is 25 years after amalgamation. So why haven't we, as managers of our own resources, been better able to identify the requirement, again, specifically for roads? That's a rhetorical question.
But a little bit of context too. This is what my financial. If I gave a blank check to my infrastructure team tomorrow, they can't possibly fix every road in 1 year, right? So there's a capacity in the
Yeah, I hear that. I don't know whether I would call that rationalization or what. But,
reality, it's reality, right?
We haven't done the job that we should have been doing for the last 20 years. Don't give us the money now because we don't have people to do it. That's a funny way to manage infrastructure.
Is context, and that's how we manage it, is context.
Roddy and then Michael.
Our business association formed in 2011, and since then I've met with every city treasurer, started with Ken Gray, to talk about tax ratios and to encourage, obviously lowering tax ratios, but rather than just asking to lower, for the city to undertake a study, look jurisdictionally around the world, to ask themselves the economic benefit of a more equitable tax ratio between, I hate to say this, residential and commercial. Commercial pay about 2.5 times. I recognize if that came down, residential would go up. Not a popular topic, but I think it was in 1991 when the municipal act was created, and the city's, the province's taxes, whatever, and so I provide each treasurer with the statement of the province at the time, which was a goal of 1 to 1. And I've talked to other municipalities that work across the province. Nobody's doing it. but I always come up and show up and make the ask. So I've now made the ask. But I think it'd be interesting rather than just ask to say, what would the economic impact be if commercial started to come down? We often hear national, we keep our tax big, United States, we keep our taxes low as an economic development tool. So would that apply at a municipal level? I know the legislation requires that it can't increase anymore after that time, so, and each year I watch, but why not really work hard to do it, what would the economic benefit be, asserting that that economic benefit would pay for itself in other ways. So I've now made the ask.
Just a quick question. Well, I'm relatively new to this board, I've been here for about 2 years. And I was just trying to do some internet research, and I'm sure you get that. But are you able to confirm, so our Ward 5, we the largest land mass, the most amount of roads, is that correct?
Yeah.
The least population?
Yeah.
And the least amount of tax revenue?
I don't know if I would say that off the top of my head, but.
Okay.
It is probably true at the highest level,
Yeah.
I believe. We bring in about $40 million of property tax revenue for the city every year.
I haven't by ward, I just don't think.
But I think on a per capita level, and this gets back to what you were saying earlier, I still think on a per capita level, West Carleton residents pay some of the highest taxes in the city.
Sure, I'm not trying to denigrate what we do here, what we do in the city. It's just more putting things in perspective with our challenges of roadworks and whatnot. Then would a solution then be to, I'm not as up to date with the development card, the Langstaff development, is that going forward?
Yes.
Okay. So isn't that, I guess, a way to, since you're a housing committee, was it?
Planning and housing, yes.
Sorry. To intensify responsibly West Carleton, and I know a lot of people moved out here to get away from intensification, but then we can leverage that intensification to get better services here.
I think that's generally the argument in favor of, or one of the arguments in favor of intensification.
Like more units per square kilometer of road. And I hate to see it, but like Barhaven, Stittsville, like they're just an urban sprawl, but they have a whole bunch of single homes and so many cul-de-sacs, so many storm management drains everywhere. And they aren't able to pay for something like that in the long term, speaking of long-term roadworks. And then that sort of back to the land sale, I haven't been following that one as much, but my understanding is they also took out 2 residential buildings from that. Is that my understanding?
I believe they took out one.
One? Okay, sorry. So if they're taking away more taxpayers from that area, doesn't it make it harder to pay for the roadworks and then pay off the loan, or the loan we're giving the development company?
No, so we own the land.
Oh, okay, but we're giving a tax break to the development company?
No, I think it's direct funding.
Oh, it's direct funding.
Zero?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a partnership, so we own the asset, the land there and some of the buildings there, we own that. It's a partnership that we have with OSA, so it's kind of a shared joint venture where they obviously run the sports programs. The city's not in the business of running minor programs, minor sports programs, or professional programs, and that's part of the agreement where we get money back, we invest, but we get money back, and they invest, and they're supposed to get contribution as well. So.
Okay. But I guess, pretty good ignorance, but would it make sense to keep a residential building that would have units that would generate property tax to then pay the city to help hopefully reward 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the contention there on specifically the land sound was, they didn't want to see too much development, it creates more congestion and blah, 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 right? But if you go back to your core point, we don't budget by ward, we don't break down the service cost by ward, it's just not manageable or feasible, so we're looking at the system that's every kind of budget.
Jim?
Question, I mean, should have maybe asked at the beginning, 2.5% increase, okay, as a guideline, whatever it is that 2.5% over last year's budget, or 2.5% over the assessed value, which changes because of the assessment growth and whatever other things?
So So it's 2.5% over your tax bill last year. So whatever you paid last year on your tax bill this year technically is 2.5% higher. The assessment value is ran by the province, impact. They haven't done an assessment, every assessment since 2016, so I was
Right.
That's my team, yeah.
But the assessment, well, it's not. The assessment goes up incrementally. I got an assessment sheet that shows 3 years or 4 years, whatever it is, and it goes from year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. Okay, so that's an increase that's built in, and the 2.5% is over that.
So our 2.5% is based on your current assessed property. So whatever you pay your 2023 tax bill. So if you paid $1,000 as a tax bill in 2023, in 2024, all things being equal, because there's no reassessment being done, you're now 2.5% higher on that $1,000.
Okay. I guess my main question was, what impact is that on the total budget of the city?
So basically, roughly for every 1% increase in taxes, property taxes, that generates about $20 million. So for a 2.5% tax increase, effectively that's $50 million that we bring into the system on existing homes. Then as new homes are built, that's also additional on top of that. So that new houses being brought into the system.
So if you had to give me an estimate of how much did the budget of the city go up, let's say last year, from the year before? In terms of dollars or percentage in terms of the money.
So 2.5% is a tax component, so that's about 50% of the budget. Then we also increase user fees, we increase other fees as well. So overall, I don't know exactly what the year-over-year budget change was. So I think, I know this 2023 budget was 4.7 million. The year before was probably around 4.56, 4.57. So,
Do the user fees go up the same? 2.5% has nothing to do with the actual quantities, it's the assessed value. So how much do the user fee goes up?
Typically, we try and increase user fees in that same level, so 2 to 2.5%. It is different, right? Different user fees go up by more. And, if I'm off the top of my head, I think there's certain in the parking, not in the rural area, but in downtown areas, some parking fees go up more than others. Different bylaw programs sometimes go up more than others, so it's really based on the specific service, but generally they do follow that same 2.5%, but there are variances. But there's literally hundreds of user fees in the city, so it does change. Judy?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up about question about housing, maybe extending on what Stephanie already raised. I think we often confuse affordable housing with social housing. And I believe there's something in the order of 12,000 people waiting for social housing in the city of Ottawa. And I'm not hearing much about any new buildings for social housing. I know you said you don't want the city to be building housing, but who will? If the city doesn't build and maintain their social housing, I mean, that's a major problem. And I just want to add to that, the other aspect of housing that I think we're really lacking in this area is long-term care. I don't believe there's one long-term care facility in your work, in our work. Which means families have to place their elderly residents a long way away, and it's a long way to visit, and it's a real uprooting for an elderly person to have to move to hire somewhere else. So I know the city owns the Peter C. Clark long-term care facility, and I just wonder if that would be a really wise investment.
I got a call today, actually, from a constituent who was inquiring about that for a family member. We do have retirement homes, but we don't have any long-term care homes in our area. I don't know what the answer to that is.
I mean, provincially, a municipality of our size, I think we're required, it's going to be part of this motion that comes through mandated versus non-mandated services. We're required to provide a certain number of beds for long-term care, but we're above that. We have Peter D. Clark and we have another one, I can't remember the name of it. So That's part of that motion that's coming forward next week, is okay for me to come back and say what's mandated versus non-mandated. So
Well, just, you know, the provincial waiting list for long-term care is astronomical.
Yeah, I agree.
I have
Yeah.
very dear friend who's been waiting for a year and a half. No hope that she'll win, probably before she dies at home.
But part of that motion will be for me to demonstrate, okay, what are we required to do and what are we doing? And in the instance of long-term care, we actually don't take it, I don't mean to be vague, but we over-service from what we're mandated, right? It's similar to winter operations, you know. Technically, we're mandated to make sure safe access to residents for emergency services. Our service standards for winter operations is probably the best in the country. They're the best in the country. So again, you know, mandated versus council directed versus what we do. That's what we are articulating in a high level motion that Councillor Brown's put forward.
So that's a study of mandated versus,
So there's a motion coming to council on Wednesday where they're instructing me to come back as part of the budget process to provide a list of services that are mandated
yes,
versus non-mandated.
okay.
It's a relatively open-ended motion, to be honest and frank, but the intent is for me to bring something forward that shows that.
And long-term care is not mandated.
There is a requirement, I can't remember again, because you know, I'm one guy that manages a lot of things. There is a requirement for us to provide, I think there's a certain number of beds, and I know we're over that, but that will be addressed in that motion as part of the table. Again, don't quote me on some things, but that details will come.
And then social housing, you agree, the city has to build that, right? No one else.
So we have one of our largest partners is Ottawa Community Housing. We have significant investments into Ottawa Community Housing. They are obviously our main builder. We also invest in other community agencies and groups. We kind of diversify a bit because there's a different suite, right? So Ottawa Community Housing tends to be more bigger number of units, but there's a number of other community partners that we do collaborate where there could be, you know, a lower number of units. We also have significant investments in our shelters. Obviously, the hotels, motels is a big issue. The scenarios gets worse every day with all the immigration and the federal, you know, the incoming. It's alarming, some of the numbers that were quoted to me today in terms of where that's going. It's getting worse. Again, lots of immigration, lots of issues. The winter season is upon us and it's getting cold outside, so it's if you go downtown every day like myself, you see it every day on the streets. It's getting worse and worse. It's a systemic issue, unfortunately.
And I didn't mean to imply that the city should not be building those houses. I just think that arming those not-for-profit housing providers with the ability to leverage land for finances is a much more effective approach than us spending $16 or $20 million on building individual units, whereas empowering those social housing development corporations to play in that field with the ability to leverage that land would have a greater impact.
Right.
So how many non-profit builders are out there who are interested in building something for no profit? We have
Quite a
a dozen, two.
More than two. I don't know.
I've met with 3.
Yeah.
There's quite a few out there. But again, it's in that economics, right? The economics of, unfortunately, you know, the price of labor goes up, the price of lumber goes up, so we're working against ourselves, right? It's the nature of the environment we live in, right? Pre-pandemic, you know, you can build a unit at, I can't remember the cost, and it's gone almost twice, threefold. It's just, you know,
Private developers have the ability to buy land and just sit on it, whereas a not-for-profit housing development corporation doesn't have that luxury because they need to build homes for people now. So it's two different.
You just mentioned you have land in Stittsville that you're going to sell and use some of the proceeds to it. Why not build social housing on that? You already own the land. You got it at a discount essentially, because you bought it before it skyrocketed.
So what we do is basically, in that scenario, we have a real estate team that does all that land management. So before we actually put a piece of land up for sale, we do go over to our housing team, and is this a good fit? Sometimes it's not a good fit because of the location, the footprint, etc. But I'll call it the first right of refusal goes to our housing team. Do you need this land? Is there a shovel ready to go in the ground to take this land and work with our community partners to build? If it's not, depending on their pipeline, then it goes to market, and then we take a portion of that revenue and then give it back to housing that way. So there is options there. It's just, again, you're at that very, whatever you want to label as, whether it's a perfect storm in the wrong way, where it's the need outweighs the capacity to build and get things done, because and the funding is just not coming from the feds and the state.
Speaking of funding, is there any talks about increasing the vacant land tax to fund the full levy?
Pardon?
Is there any talks about increasing the vacant land tax to fund, or better fund? Or is that more council?
That's a council direction. So there was a big debate in August where there was a motion to cancel altogether. It was defeated, but
My understanding was that based on purely logistics, or they just didn't want to be taxed more?
they wanted to remove it altogether. So cancel the program, no such thing as DUT, refund what's been paid, and move on. There's no such thing as a vacant tax.
We've got 4 minutes left. Any further questions? Okay, well, if there's no more questions or comments, I just would like to take the opportunity to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. And the input that you provided is very valuable. I know there's copious notes being taken in multiple locations in the room tonight. If you do want to follow up on any issues, I know there's a few questions here that we weren't able to answer tonight. So please, yes, there's forms here you can fill out before you leave if you want to hand them back in, if there's something you wanted to say tonight but didn't get the chance. If you can't do that tonight, you can email the office or give us a call. Like I said, the consultation doesn't begin or end with tonight's session. This will be an ongoing topic of discussion. We will be moving through committees. Like I said, if any of you want to make delegations at committees or talk further about how you might be able to do that and influence the draft budget, please reach out. Otherwise, I'll wish you a wonderful evening and a safe ride home.